Welcome to the Green to Gold podcast that informs our listeners on how the growing low carbon building mandates and liabilities can be turned into profitable business opportunities. I'm your host, Robert Politzer, and each week we embark on a journey to explore innovative solutions and strategies that aim to make building upgrades and decarbonization profitable while addressing typical client building owner objections. Today, I want to welcome Martin Kelly, founder and CEO of Innovo Net Zero. As the immense challenges of climate change have become clearer, Martin founded Innovo Net Zero to profitably halve global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by commercializing the best profitable clean technologies. Innovo's worked with some of the world's biggest technology search platforms, and as an independent technology integrator, Innovo globally commercializes profitable, proven technologies. Innovo can also raise capital and run Innovo Ventures to build and run plants in conjunction with its clean technology partners. So, Martin, a big welcome to you and to everything that you're doing. Really can't wait to get into this interview.
Thank you very much, Robert. With that introduction, I feel I can say no more. You seem to have covered it all.
Well, knowing what I know of you and the interactions we had so far, I think you're a very, very deep well. You have a deep well of knowledge and expertise to share our listeners. So why don't we start with you telling us, providing some of the highlights of your journey to found Innovo, and since you found Innovo, your journey since that time.
Right. So I founded Innovo 13 years ago, and but it's only really in the last 7 or 8 years that the mission for net zero came to the forefront. Innovo has always had an additional goal besides just making money and being profitable. It also had to have a philanthropic goal, and that emerged when we focused on net zero. And we now look for and globally commercialize and invest in profitable clean technologies, which can have a substantial impact on climate change. So, and as you know, Robert, there are many, many clean technologies around, hundreds of thousands of them, but very few of them are profitable, and an even smaller number of them are globally scalable to have a massive climate impact. So we are looking for the finest of diamonds, if you will, in terms of these technologies. And then we partner up with them, and then we help scale them out globally. So the great news is they do exist. There are a number of really amazing, profitable, clean technologies that we have found. They are not ours. We're independent in that sense. But our job is to scale these up and help them to get scaled much faster than normal. It's very interesting because if you look at solar and wind power as two of the most successful, profitable, clean technologies, it's taken them 30 years to get from first small-scale, profitable operations to the scale they are now. But the challenge we have is we don't have 30 years. We now have 6 years to halve CO2 emissions, which seems almost impossible. But with the technologies that we've found, and this is just us from these technologies, it is possible to halve CO2 emissions, but we need huge amounts of capital, and we also need commercial partners on board with this goal.
Mhm, mhm. Right. So one of the things that attracted me very much to Innovo was your emphasis on profitability. And so in my experience, there are many very well-intentioned, environmentalists, who, I completely understand their desire to, to fix this global climate crisis, which is probably, I think, arguably the greatest crisis in human history. And very sincere, but usually rely on sort of the stick approach, right? Regulations and fines and violations. You're taking more of the profitability
Yeah,
approach.
yeah,
So
definitely.
why so much of an emphasis on profitability?
So if you look back into the mists of time to where climate change started with, it actually started here in the UK. We carry a national responsibility for the founding of the Industrial Revolution and
Mm,
coal-fired, fossil-fired plants. And it did not, the Industrial Revolution did not start because they had the first equivalent of COP1 and decided, wouldn't it be great if we had, um, if we could improve the planet and improve living standards enormously. It's the Industrial Revolution. They didn't have that. It took off because it was profitable, and there were no regulations supporting it, forcing it. It just spread like wildfire, pardon the pun, round the planet because it made money. And so it seems to me that it's only from making a profit from clean technologies that they will grow very quickly. And I think solar and wind are supreme examples of this. Now there are other technologies out there which are profitable, and there are amazing technologies which can make the burning of oil and gas and coal net zero. They actually can convert the carbon dioxide that belches out of industrial factories into profitable products. And in fact, a ton of CO2 is worth about $3,000 of profit with the technologies, one of the technologies that we have found, which is extraordinary. So it's very profitable to invest in this. CO2 becomes an asset,
mm,
and fossil fuels can become clean and make a profit becoming clean.
mm. That's really kind of getting into the whole notion of circular economy, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so, as a former biology teacher, I used to teach about that, everything in the planet is in a cycle. The carbon
yeah,
cycle, water cycle, the nitrogen cycle. It's only and and every living organism is part of a cycle. You know, live, die, go back into back into the ground, into the earth, as a biomass that gets reincorporated. Only humans have created this notion of a linear process, right? But
yep,
there's big
yep,
move towards circularity, the circular economy, and the notion there is no such thing as waste, right? That
yep,
and that, which is what you're saying, even carbon dioxide in excess amounts, can be captured and turned back into products. And
hmm,
so it's very much so the circular economy is integral, right, to this
yeah.
whole with what we do on a daily basis. So very interesting. And so for years now, in working in commercial real estate in New York City and founding the first green building company and advocating for green buildings, I have heard, and you've probably heard this also, an objection, almost a knee-jerk objection that no, green costs too much. We're not interested. I've heard that so many times. Of course, the market is transforming, but so how do you counter that belief on the part of so many
Well,
commercial building owners?
I mean, it's true. that green does cost, and most of the time it costs money, but it needn't. That's the big. You need not cost money to be green, clean, and profitable. In fact, you can actually make money on the transition. So let me give you an example in terms of building technologies. So we know of a technology, we know of two technologies actually, which make air conditioning much more efficient, right? And they makes air conditioning cheaper, so it's profitable to put this technology in, and but it actually reduces the amount of CO2 emission and the energy burnt to make the fans go round in the first place. So that is a classic example of putting in a profitable clean technology, which is the only profitable technology that we focus on, actually can achieve really good green outcomes at the same time as being profitable. So that drives the adoption. That, as we've seen with solar and wind now, it's actually cheaper to put solar and wind in than it is fossil fuel. But there are limitations. It doesn't always, the sun does not always shine and the wind does not always blow. And even when, as we have in the UK, you build a massive amounts of wind power, you've then got to distribute that electricity from the grid and store it and transport it across the country. But
Yeah.
there are, I mean, it's interesting, you were talking about being a biology teacher in your earlier years.
Yeah.
Algae actually generates half of the world's oxygen, algae in the oceans.
Yes.
Green stuff, the stuff you see in the pond in your backyard. And that actually is a natural biological solution to carbon dioxide. And there are now technologies that we know of that are using algae to digest the CO2 and to convert it into profitable outputs like animal feed and biofertilizer and food supplements and so on, and do that very profitably. But the challenge is the investment. It's getting the investment into these technologies on a scale which is can match the need. Now, on the other hand, the cost to heavy industry right now of converting steel and cement and so forth is vast. McKinsey said that the global steel industry is going to have to invest $4 trillion to convert to clean steel. And you know how much steel goes into buildings. I'm looking at the backdrop on your screen there. There's an enormous amount of steel, and that has generated a huge amount of carbon to date. And actually, just simply to connect the smokestacks directly into algae can actually address that problem. Because it becomes profitable, zero smoke emissions, and we have clean steel for buildings. And the same is true of cement and concrete, because there's also a great deal of concrete in all those buildings. But if you make it so it's clean and more profitable, because it is actually more profitable to make cement and concrete that's clean now with this technology than it is to make it dirty and just emit the smoke to the sky. And that's how it works.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of folks don't know that the production of Portland cement, which is integral to conventional concrete, is responsible for, I believe, 8 or 9% of all global carbon emissions, right?
Yeah,
So
it's huge.
Just that piece alone, between steel and concrete, That's a
Yeah,
huge contributor, right?
yeah.
Absolutely. I actually just heard of a startup that's got an additive that to concrete that will eliminate the use of Portland cement. And we did a project actually for the Mark Twain House Education and Visitor Center. It was the first LEED certified museum in the country about 10, 12 years ago. And we used fly ash from coal-fired plants and mixed it in place of the Portland cement, and it did a nice job. So yeah, absolutely, very important. And so with you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox. Of all of your components, what would you say are the most prominent and effective components of your business model for achieving profitability through sustainability?
Uh, First of all, I think the search partners that we work with, our ability to find these technologies, I think that's a core part of our value add. Um, we know how to find them, we know how to screen them, and we know how to find them and get them at the right stage. I mean, the technology I've just been talking about, we've tracked that for 8 years, and it is just now becoming fully scalable.
Mm,
Um, that's a key part of it. We also forge partnerships because we can't do this alone. But then no single company or country could do it alone.
mm,
There needs to be partnerships, and they need to be fast, and they need to be fair. So
mm,
we reach out to investors and big commercial companies, and we connect them with talent. And those three things, the investment, the commercial partners, the large commercial partners, and the talent, that's that's the prize combination, if you will, that makes
mhm.
that this possible and makes it work.
Yeah, and to your point, about how difficult it is to find these clean tech and prop tech companies that are coming into the marketplace globally on a daily basis. Um, I've personally recognized that for some years because, what starting with my first green building company and trying to find these vendors is always kind of very organic, and a kind of a long process, and it's very difficult to find them. And, which is one of the reasons that we're setting up a vendor showcase, in the metaverse, or
Mhm.
you know, um, so that it's sort of that one virtual location that, that anybody involved in decarbonization and green building upgrades will be able to come to find these vendors, many of whom are going to be yours because we're collaborating on this, right?
Yep.
That
Yeah,
one
we are.
location
Yeah.
at one location where you can find them, and outside of going to a trade show, and for these vendors to have a booth at a trade show, an in-person trade show in New York, at least it's $15,000 for 2.5 days. How
Yes.
many
Yeah.
vendors cannot afford can't can't afford to have a table at an in-person trade show? So we're really
Yeah.
excited about this component of our business
Yeah.
model, and then working with you on it as well. um,
Yeah.
so how do you see Innovo evolving over time?
Well, we have to evolve um, at the speed of light, really, because that's what the need is. We're driven by the time scale, the clock we are running against. Um, we don't have the planet doesn't have the time to take 40, 50 years to do this. Now, that presents great challenges. So we have designed Innovo to scale incredibly rapidly, and we've had some fantastic inputs from all the executives who've worked with us in preparing for this. Right, I mean, we were talking earlier about the investors, right, for thinking right the way through to how you build in liquidity to these technologies, because the challenge with a lot of the early stage technologies is how do you get the investment in so that they can scale, But then how do you offer private exits? How do you offer liquidity to investors when it's not a publicly listed company? And we've developed an internal market for shares, and we also are planning to, because of the work we've done with investment banks and asset managers, for them to run an Novo exchange traded fund. So
Hmm.
right the way through from how we commercialize them, these technologies rapidly and at scale, and then right the way through to getting capital into them and returns on investment out very quickly. We've been thinking that through. So this can be scaled uh, really incredibly fast.
Yeah, I completely share your sentiment. I believe this is the most important, impactful decade in human history. I really, truly believe that.
Yep.
And, of course, the question is, frankly, not to be a downer here, but there's a lot of questions about whether or not we're already past, the point of no return, and whether we're going to be able to steer the ship away from the worst impacts of our climate crisis. And by the way, I was at the Wall Street Green Summit last week, and there was a woman talking about, climate change, and climate change. And, I raised my hand afterwards and said, I, I believe it's really important to refer to this as our climate crisis.
Mm.
And that's because, the doubters, they use this notion of climate change as like, yeah, sure, the weather changes all the time, things change all the time, which is true, but it doesn't change the way it's changing. The
Yeah.
accelerated change is not,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so I think, we've got a crisis, probably the greatest crisis in human civilization, right?
mhm.
So
Yeah.
so people like you and what you're doing, you're a climate hero, and I just salute everything you're doing. And it's been such a pleasure to have met you guys and to be collaborating. It's really a thrill for me. So, what is the best way for potential customers to find you and your company, Martin?
So, well, first of all, thanks for what you've just said. That feeling is mutual one. Great respect for what you've been doing at Green Street Global, Robert. We're kindred spirits
Yeah,
in that respect. Um, so it's simply a matter of going to the Innovo website, Innovo-network, INNOVO, and there's any number of ways you can contact us depending on whether you're an investor, a corporate partner, or someone who wants to work with us.
excellent. So that's fantastic. We look forward to our continuing growing relationship, and especially
Yeah, yeah.
featuring your fantastic clean tech and prop tech companies on our showcase, our vendor showcase. So so thank you again so much, and that concludes another inspiring episode of our Green to Gold podcast. We hope you enjoyed the deep dive into how building decarbonization mandates can be turned into profitable value add opportunities. A huge thank you to our fantastic guest, Martin Kelly, for sharing his expertise and shedding light on how to turn green into gold for the corporate and commercial building marketplace. We want to thank our listeners also. Please subscribe to our Green to Gold podcast and leave a review, and we will see you next week. Again, thank you so much, Martin, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks very much, Robert. Speak soon.
Take care.
Thanks. Take care now.
You too.